What's going on, YouTube? As you know, the Void Erosion 30 has removed the skill debuffs for Descendants. Only the skill debuff attributes for Descendants. So the attribute on guns, it's not going to do any more damage. They have also increased the amount of damage that you can do with skills. Well, right here, this dictates all of the erosion attributes and their skill boost. As you can see, there is a base skill boost all the way up to the challenge purges, and then there is now no negatives as well, which is very nice. Honestly, the only thing stopping us from a different type of leaderboards than all Serenas and maybe a Lepic or a Luna, but it is a nice change of pace. That being said, Descendant change is probably mandatory, so I've decided to rebuild a lot of Descendants for this purpose. The first one up is VIESSA, and you might think that VIESSA needs a lot of different builds because she is and can have a lot of different things inside of VIESSA, but there's really only one build you need, and I will go over that in this video. If you think that you need like 5 different builds with VIESSA, you are wrong. The main weapon for VIESSA, a lot of people are going to say Clairvoyance is the best weapon, but really that's just because we don't have a better option. The Clairvoyance can add up to an 80% resistance removal. This will give you around a 30% damage increase at full stacks. The way Clairvoyance works is that you have 2 stages, a Void Gaze and an Appalling Calling. These are 2 separate buffs, although they are depicted with the same icon on your screen. So here we have Destroyer, arguably the only female enemy. I think there's a Slayer one too on the other faction, but 22,000. Now keep in mind this is with no modules, the wrong reactor, and no set bonus. So this is basically the minimum damage that can be done. And then whenever you remove 80% of the resistances, it goes from 22,000 to 26,000. Now, Legion of Darkness is weak to chill, but usually it's around 30% of a damage difference. It would be a little bit higher, however, my Clairvoyance is only level 3. I could make it level 4, but Nexon and its drop rates hate me. So, here we are. The other weapon that you might want to use for VIESSA is the BLUEBEETLE, but that is for a different build if you really want a different build, which I highly recommend you build whatever you want to build regardless, because the build that you have the most fun with is the best build. Because at the end of the day, games are fun, not work. Wow. Unless you're grinding out arc tuning. I'll start with a lowdown on how VIESSA works. So we'll start off with her passive ability. Her passive ability generates 3 ice spheres, each with a cooldown of 15 seconds. Whenever you inflict damage, you get the spheres, but the amount of spheres that you get are not predicated on the type of ability that you use, as long as you do damage with the ice ability whilst the spheres are not on cooldown. Each one of these shoots and then explodes for the same type of damage and inflicts Ice Shackle. Ice Shackle is a debuff that is specific to VIESSA, which lowers their speed by a percentage depending on if it's regular enemy or a Colossus. The next one is her 4th ability, Blizzard. Blizzard is a snapcast with an animation time. As you can see, you get all your ice spheres on hit. When you build for Blizzard, I highly recommend not building for duration. And that is simply because it deals extra damage whenever the ability ends, and it deals more damage whenever you snapcast the ability for the first time. For the first time, whenever you snapcast the ability, you will see 2 ticks of damage. You saw 2 ticks there. That is because it hits twice, although it does not say that in the skills tooltip. Don't know why. Never has. The 3rd ability, Cold Snap, is a column of ice that you summon floor. This is one of her higher skill power modifier attacks, although it does consume quite a bit of MP because simply how you typically will use VIESSA, you won't really use this ability that much unless all of your abilities are on cooldown and you just need to like kill some ads, do whatever. The 2nd ability, Frost Road, is actually an important skill, and this is one that has changed since the past. It creates an ice road on the ground, and actually I think this ability used to be called Ice Road, increasing her movement speed by 40%. It is important to note that movement speed does have a cap at 1300. The sprint speed typically starts at 800, so anything beyond 1300 is just wasting whatever points or allocation that you would have to spend into getting your sprint speed up. So don't bother getting higher than 1300 sprint speed. On the Clairvoyance, I have a sprint speed of 15%. If it was at 20%, I would actually have my sprint speed maxed out right now, but I don't want to sit here and use a whole bunch of materials for an extra 60 sprint speed. I don't think it's all that important. The second one I have is grappling hook charge time. Your grappling hook maxes out at 50%, so there's no point in putting 2 grappling hooks on there. I've already made this mistake. If you have a choice, I still recommend the mid-air grapple specifically for VIESSA. Sometimes it's better for mid-air and sometimes it's better for a long distance, depending on the character and the build. I like mid-air with a combination of the increased movement speed because you can zoom across any map. Extremely expedient. The first ability, Frost Shards, it's just an icicle shard that she shoots. It explodes and debuffs the enemy with Ice Shackle and deals a hefty skill power modifier. As far as her transcendent modules, you have a couple options. I do believe that the best option is Absolute Zero. Absolute Zero Supremacy. I'll go into Absolute Zero first and explain why with a build, and I'll compare it against everyone's other favorite, Cold-Bloodedness, and I'll explain with Arc Tuning why Cold-Bloodedness has been a power crept past with Absolute Zero. With Absolute Zero, on the base, it turns all of them into singular. This is incredibly important for synergy and makes VIESSA just run more smooth. It also gives you a damage bonus on all of your abilities, more than 5%. There is a reason I use the 5% in here, which I'll go into. But the skill power modifiers of all of the abilities are increased, and they all go to singular. With that, it gives you a base increase of skill critical hit rate of 20%, allowing you to easily get a 100% skill critical hit rate. In Arc Tuning, I do have the skill critical hit rates in here, although you do need skill insight to get to the 100%. So really, you don't need the critical hit rate. However, because you need insight, you don't really need the critical hit rate in your Arc Tuning. So if you want 100%, you don't need these 3 nodes. And I actually recommend skill duration instead, just a little bit. And I say just a little bit because sometimes there is a bug with the Ultimate Blizzard where at the end, you don't always get the burst damage for some reason unless the duration is over. I don't know if this bug has been fixed, and I don't really want to do the testing every single time. If you want more MP, you can have more MP. I'm just going to leave it here. As long as you have a little bit more duration, I do not recommend running duration on purpose for the purpose of that skill, simply because the way it works with the tick damage and most of the damage being done at cast and at destruction or ending of the cast, you'll lower your damage output if you put duration on simply because you have to replace the duration with something else. Now, because she is a crit-based descendant and you want 100% crit all the time and you want your damage to come from crit, you will need skill insight, front lines, emergency measures, and skill concentration. We always want at least 1 HP mod, guys. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Sure, you can take off the HP mod and YOLO dolo, swing around, have fun crawling on the ground all the time, like a certain Lepic at the beginning of the game that he was known for. But I just run 1 HP for everyone in your party's sanity. Now, the reason focus on singular is on VIESSA isn't necessarily for the damage. It's actually more for the 6% cooldown than it is for the damage. So you'll want 1 focus on module, an MP conversion, the second focus on chill module, and nimble fingers. Max cooldown really is, it's just going to be mandatory for a while, I guess. Every build is almost MP conversion, nimble fingers, 2 focus on modules, and this little golden thingy right here in the Arc Tuning tree. It is what it is. If you would like a screenshot of it, feel free. Move my head out the way just in case. On the reactor, you want skill cooldown, especially. With all of these things, you will get a skill cooldown rate of 87%. It maxes out at 90%, but, you know, I do understand. If you really want the 90%, you're going to have to run a different build. But it's not enough to matter. Since you max out at 90% anyway, it's the difference of like half a second. Now, the other one, I have skill critical hit damage. You can actually have multiple things on here. Skill critical hit damage. If you are vying for the leaderboards in purges, you definitely want Legion of Darkness on here. The additional skill attack when attacking a faction, so it's about 10% more damage just having that one roll on the gun. I'll pass. Thank you. As far as the inversion tree, you can put on the skill cooldown, which will fill in the gap for 10 seconds out of every 25 seconds, but I don't really think it's worth it because the 2.5% really just, you don't even need to make up for it. You will barely notice it. You're a skill descendant, so please don't bother with the firearm attack on your guns. Typically, you're going to want some form of MP recovery because that will just make your entire play smoother. I recommend the selective neurostimulation, neural focus augmentation, and honestly, dealer's choice with anything else. Or the external components. There's really two choices. There is the Slayer set and then the Hunter set. The Hunter set will give you better MP recovery, but for Void Erosion, you definitely want damage. There is more damage out of the Slayer set than there is out of the Polar Knight set. And this comes down to two reasons why. The Polar Knight set can give you up to 60% actual damage. The additional damage equal to your max HP is caca. Don't even count it, honestly. But with a 5-second duration, you're going to lose stacks all the time. You're going to have to develop your stacks. Your damage isn't going to be consistent and throughout. And at 60% extra, your critical hit damage will go from 4.47 to 5 point. So it is an extra 11% damage. While the Slayer set is a 26% hard increase. So you're trading 26% damage for an extra 10% damage is not really worth your time. And that is the build that I would stick with for VIESSA. If you are interested in the other Transcendent modules, I'll go over them. The first one is Glacial Cloud. This build is somewhat viable now, just simply because of the cooldown reduction from 6 seconds to 5 seconds, now that you have the arc tuning tree. While that 10-second or that 1 second doesn't feel like it counts, it will actually count whenever it comes down to speedrunning, and it could be viable in the new purges. It doesn't really do much else other than that, except for lower down the cooldown and make you just like throw it instead of snapcast it. So it lowers the animation speed, which is around a second, and the cooldown time, which is around another second. So you're getting 2 seconds faster activation, but it is barely noticeable. The way hypothermia works, it trades your ice spheres for ice needle. Ice Needle just does damage instead of doing the skill speed debuff, but I do not think that the damage is really worth it over the slowing down and the chilling effect of what she does. The chilling effect is S tier in almost all the content. However, I do understand for bossing damage, it gives you a little bit extra damage at 200% skill power modifier. While that's nothing to scoff at, this does 1500 every second, so you're really not getting a ton more damage out of the build having Ice Needle inflicted. Cold Snap Watch gives the enemy a different debuff for the third ability. This I do not believe is worth it, honestly, unless you're just trying to freeze all of the enemies, but it's better to kill them than to freeze them. Cold Cohesion creates 5 spheres instead of 3 spheres. This is remotely useless, and I will let you know why. If you pay attention, the spheres attack once at a time, not all at once. So you have to wait for a cooldown for each ice sphere to hit. If you have maximum cooldown, you get your ice spheres back before your ice spheres even shoot, and they regenerate each other, so it just doesn't matter. I think cold cohesion would need a massive buff. The way they could fix cold cohesion is just making all 5 ice spheres shoot at once. That would make it somewhat viable, but it still wouldn't be as good as just Absolute Zero, because Absolute Zero not only does that, but it also increases the skill power, almost doubling it. So you're actually losing damage by equipping Cold Cohesion. Now for Cold-Bloodedness, the only other competitor. What Cold-Bloodedness does is change your Ice Road ability to Cold Blood. I now get an added cooldown bonus of 20%, but I don't really need it because I'm already at 87% of the build. The part of this that makes it good is that it lets me take off Focus on Singular, which is a 6% increase in my cooldown, lets me equip more damage on my reactor, and lets me go into a different arc tuning tree. So I could theoretically get more damage out of Cold-Bloodedness if I take this stuff off. However, the problem with that is that I would lose the increase in damage from all of my skills being singular and having a singular reactor, in addition to the actual damage increase that I get from Absolute Zero, because it nearly doubles the ability of my passive, and then each one it gets about 150% increase on the modifiers. So Cold-Bloodedness for me right there is out. Now it also gives you a skill power modifier increase, or a skill power increase of 5. The problem with this is that that skill power increase stacks onto the Slayer set. So you're not going from 0 to 5%, you're going from 26 to 31%, which decreases the effectiveness of that 5%. Not to mention, it does not give you an increase on the skill power modifier, so it actually gives you less of a power increase than Absolute Zero. It does give you, however, an MP cost decrease of 20%, which lets you spam skills easier. So if you're building a skill spamming run, I could see Cold-Bloodedness, but you lose a lot of synergy. It's a lot more work than just being able to cast what you want, when you want, regardless of what you have in your tank. So I still recommend Absolute Zero over Cold-Bloodedness. But if you prefer Cold-Bloodedness to run the game, to enjoy the game more, of course run Cold-Bloodedness. What you have fun with is the best build for you. Also, another fact that I almost forgot to mention is that you don't get the critical hit increase of Absolute Zero. So you'll have to do something else to get to 100%. The first ability and the second ability are both fusion. There is a gun called Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle increases your skill critical hit rate of 115. So if you want 100% critical hit rate, which is what you should have if you're playing VIESSA, you will need to run Blue Beetle instead of Clairvoyance. So you not only do you lose all of the synergy and everything, you also lose the capability to use Clairvoyance for an 80% resistance removal on the enemy that you're shooting. Keep in mind this is single player. If I had 3 VSs and a Lepic, this would look insane. Pretty effective. As far as Serena, I don't know if this will pass the leaderboards with Serena, but at least we have a contender for skill damage, finally. Now, you can see these enemies creeping out of my attack zone. Obviously, I'm dying because I'm not trying to be super effective here. I'm just trying to showcase that skill damage is now effective. Much more effective than it was before. And even your other skills are still effective. You can run MP Collector or something like that, but I haven't really found the need to. Mostly because there is MP drops, and 3 VSs doing this would just clean house. I would very much like to sweep the Serenas off of the leaderboard, and I do think some mix-match hodgepodge of skill descendants, maybe with the Serena in the background, is going to end up being it. You might have a question, what about the final boss? And honestly, you should just snap control. If you want to go in with VSs, I still recommend a Lepic. Lepic is going to scoop them all together with his toe grenade. I would recommend Valby, but they removed that from her 4th ability. Why? We'll never know, and we'll probably never stop complaining about it. I did this video on Twitch. I do a lot of testing on Twitch. If you're interested, check it out. That is the VIESSA build. Any questions, leave them in the comments. You'll have a sick day. Peace out.